Good morning and welcome to Onward in Love and Caregiving. I'm Greg Johnson. I'm the president and CEO of GJP International, Greg Johnson Partnerships International. And here in New York, I have the great privilege of serving as the chief advisor to the CEO of Emblem Health for family caregiving. I want to welcome you to this broadcast as it is part of a continuing series that we have been doing for now over 3 years. This program began, yes, it began as a conversation with the Rev, and then we moved it to the topic of Onward in Love and Caregiving. It is a program in which we talk of family caregiving, faith, and spirituality. And as has been our custom for the last couple of years, as we begin the new calendar year, I like to go back with all of us, those of us who have been doing this for a very long time, those who are totally new to the world of family caregiving, and all the stops along the way in that journey, to give us a chance just to step back, to take a look at family caregiving. What is it in its broadest sense? What do we mean by family? What do we mean by caregiving? And then we looked at the topic of the caregiver maintaining the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. So we have done so far a 6-part series, and today we are talking about a topic that is very precious to my heart. We're talking about grief. And during this pandemic that we have been going through, nothing could better describe what I have been spending a vast amount of my time doing, both with the people with Emblem Health, with people here in the city, with people in many parts of the world. The 3 topics have been death, dying, and grief. And all are very much a part of family caregiving. Too often we don't see it as such. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Now, as has been our custom, we open this conversation, this dialogue, with a moment of prayer. And we have been praying for months and years now for those on the front lines and the first responders to the COVID-19 and the pandemic. That we continue to do. We add to it now prayers for peace, prayers for brilliant thinking, mindful thinking, loving thinking that will bring about peace. The insanity of this horror that has been imposed upon the world by Russia. May sanity prevail. And let us all pray together in whatever your tradition might be. Let us hold people on all sides in love, in peace, and in the gift of war no more. And I can't think of a better prayer to unite all of us than one that we have used on occasions during the pandemic, and one that is a very, very popular and special prayer, and that is the prayer of St. Francis. So I ask each of you to take just a moment to center yourself, whatever you've been doing, put it aside. The to-do list, it'll be there when we're finished. But let's just take a moment. Let's take a moment to take a deep breath, to go within to that spark of the divine within each and every one of us, and send that light forward, because in this darkness, never has light been needed more. And each of us has a piece of light to give. And let us find that light as together we pray. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow charity. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is error, the truth. Where there is doubt, the faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is dying to ourselves that we are born. We are born to eternal life. Amen and amen. Now, before I begin our program today, I want to just share with you that next week we're going to have a wonderfully special opportunity. Thanks to Jean, we have been once a month having a guest speaker. And when it suddenly was coming on to looking into the month of March, Jean immediately said to me, well, that is St. Patrick's Day. I've got a very good idea, and I knew exactly about whom he was thinking. So next week, on Thursday morning, we're going to move the Friday program, this program that you normally watch on Friday morning at 8 o'clock. We're going to move it to Thursday morning, 8 a.m. in New York City, St. Patrick's Day. And our guest will be Father Richard Dowling, live from Killarney, Ireland. We couldn't be more appropriate if we wanted to be. And I'm really looking forward to having this wonderful opportunity. Richard, Father Dowling, I know him as Richard, he knows me as Greg, we met one another due to these programs, and he's going to be talking a bit about that, but he's also going to be sharing his ministry, his work in the healthcare system, and his ministry in caregiving. It's been a joy getting to know Father Richard. And with technology, he's become very much a part of Marble Collegiate Church during the pandemic. He's been finding our times convenient to his schedule. And therefore, I just can't think of a more wonderful way. And then Jean and I will be off to the parade. After all, this is something Jean's never seen. And many people, including Father Dowling, says New York celebrates St. Patrick's Day sometimes more than the Irish. Well, we all become Irish. So it's going to be a fun program. And I want you to hear the great work that he's doing. One of the things we want to do in the coming year is to share many more of our caregiving, and carer friends all over the world, because you know we are working in all areas, in Nepal, in South Africa, in Europe. We are dealing with certainly Indonesia, with New Zealand, with Australia, and we are blessed by this. Through this conversation, through these sharing, we have come to know one another and been blessed. I've been so blessed to meet new people and people that I knew, to go even deeper in learning of the fine work that they are doing. And I can't think of a better thing to do than to share it. So next week, we will have on Sunday night our regular Caring for Me, Caring for You, a thought for the week. On Thursday, it will be Onward in Love and Caregiving, with a direct broadcast from Killarney, Ireland and New York City, thanks to technology. And Gene will be here in New York for his first broadcast. So lots of firsts next Thursday. And then Friday will be when we will do Hymns by Request, which is normally our Thursday morning sing-along at 11 o'clock. And we'll do that on Friday. So mark it on your calendars, and I'll be putting up posters on it, flyers, and feel free to share that. This is all that we're so anxious to share with people. Now, this morning, I want to talk about the topic of grief. Here in America, this has been a topic that has not been discussed, just as death and dying tend to be topics that have for a long time not been talked about. And in some ways, the pandemic has indeed opened the door because we have been faced with enormous numbers of deaths. And I am blessed to have been able to walk with many, many people, have been able to counsel and to share. But it just reminds me that we must, when we're looking at the journey in caregiving, now, not every caregiving journey ends in death. That's for certain. But many of them do. And that was certainly true during the height of the COVID pandemic. And therefore, it becomes very important for us to talk about death and dying and grief. Now, there are some programs that I have that are really quite useful to you that I did with Robert Friedman, one of the founders of Elder Care Law. And those can be found on the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is very simply Family Caregiving with the Rev. And there are two extended conversations that Robert and I did a number of years ago, but it's extremely relevant, dealing with documents that are needed in the dying process and in the death process. In other words, there are documents that a caregiver needs to know and understand, both for the care recipient and for themselves. That's one of the gifts of caregiving. We learn many, many things that we're going to need in our own lives. So there are documents that are needed while in the hospital, while in hospice, all those sorts of things. And we go into each one. And then there are documents that are needed after death to accomplish the wishes of the former care recipient who is now the deceased. So I urge you to look at those. I'm not going to be going through that today because I'm going to move on to the step after the death has occurred, where we're talking about grief. Now, many of you know Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's written the great treatise on grief, and it has been highly utilized by religious leaders, by psychologists, social workers. And if you don't know it, I urge you to take a look. It's the stages of grief. And many, many people have found help and have found comfort in it. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Sorry, someone whom I've had the great pleasure of knowing and having worked with in the past. I would like to suggest to you another book. Gail Sheehy, who was a very dear friend, Gail wrote the wonderful book Passages, which rocketed her to fame. And as life went on, she began writing other books of other pieces of passages in life. And at one point, her husband became very ill. Clay Falker, the noted magazine and editor and publisher. And Gail and I had lunch. And as we talked, I heard another book coming. And it has happened, Passages in Caregiving. And one of the central tenets in Gail's book is something that we talked about that very day. How truly the caregiving journal is like the labyrinth. Now, you know, all over the world, there are labyrinths which are used in religious meditation, in times of deep contemplation, where one walks it very gently from the outside, and you begin this journey, and then you stop and you go this way, and then you go that way. And it's a long journey to the center. And there are many, many ways of walking the labyrinth. There are books on that, and I urge you, if you've never read any of those, give a look at it. But I'm going to walk with you today into the labyrinth as a caregiver. As we enter the labyrinth with our care recipient, It's the caregiving journey that we're on. And as we go, we meet a challenge, and yes, we got that. We got that. Okay. And then we continue this way. And then, oops, there's another crisis. And with doctors and with medical and professionals, we overcome that, and then we go this way. But there are constantly changes that are happening. It's a boomerang sort of thing. And each time we get a new challenge, we think, yes, we can do it. And sometimes we get too cocky about it, quite frankly. But it is so exhausting because we're so afraid. We don't know the story, and yet in our hearts, we do feel that we know the story. And the truth is, in many cases that are going to be terminal, we are walking our loved one home until we get to the center. And once we arrive at the center of that labyrinth, it is our gift to take the hand of our loved one and place it literally into the hand of the divine. I know that's how it was for me when right in this very room, after many back and forth and journeys through the labyrinth, when my late husband Joe died. That's 11 years ago now, and yet I can feel it just as if it was this moment. I knew that he was gone, and I was placing his hand with a prayer into the hand of the divine. And then, after we take care of those immediate needs, we are still in the center of the labyrinth. And this is where a caregiver needs to realize we are both the caregiver for the person who has been now taken from us, who has died. And we need to give all the love that we gave to that person to ourselves, because we are now the care recipient. And it is why I urge again and again and again people who are at that point, who immediately want to go and find somebody else to care for. I say, no. In the future, perhaps. But before you can do that, there's one person that you truly need to take care of, and gently. And that is you. To acknowledge the grief, to begin growing through the grief, not going through it, but growing through it. And there are positive moments and difficult moments. But grief is very much a part of love. Queen Elizabeth said it when Prince Philip died. Grief is the price we pay for loving. And it is so. And therefore, we begin to walk back out of that labyrinth, slowly caring for ourselves, leaning on people who have been with us through the journey, perhaps finding a support group. And if you don't belong to a faith community, one of the best ways to find a support group or support in your grieving is to speak with the funeral home that you have dealt with. They are very much aware of resources that can be of great benefit. There is no one way to care, and there is no one way to grieve. And grieving, to be perfectly honest, it never ends. People who say, oh, we want closure. That's a phrase I don't put up with. I don't want closure. That's almost like saying I want to close off that part of my life. No. I'm grateful for that part of my life. I know that it's not as it was, and it never will be as it was. But with therapy, with group support, I can slowly walk out of the grief. I can surrender letting go gently to receive abundantly. And as I let go, as I surrender, love begins to come into my life again. The grief is there, but you can talk to many people. It changes. But don't expect it to go away, because there will be moments always, and that changes. Change is the biggest word in the grief journey. But I, for one, am grateful because I have grown so strong. After Joe died, and this was 11 years ago, I came to the realization that my family had been three. Joe and I had adopted a young boy in Bali when he was 20, and he was with us for 20 years until in 2005, bone cancer took him horribly and blessedly rather quickly. It changed our lives. And yet the night I remember so well when the phone call came in, we had been there, we were back in New York. I had made arrangements, and Joe had, for him, but it was appropriate for him to be with his birth family at that point. And we'd made that reconciliation. And Joe and I knelt, and we gave thanks for a precious child that we never expected to have in our lives at all. It was a very different world from 2022. And then that day, 6 years later, when Joe died right here in my arms, again, I began the journey out of the labyrinth with a prayer, giving thanks for his life and for the 41 years that we had spent together. And then with my therapist, with my marble family, with a grief support group, I began to walk out of the grief, surrendering, giving thanks. And those of you who are in 12-step program know exactly where that came from. It saved my life once before, and it enriched my life in the grief journey. Surrendering my loved one and moving forward. Surrender and finding gratitude for the places we'd been, the things we had done, the mistakes we'd made, and being able to laugh at them. And slowly I began to learn. I knew it would never be the same, but I had to meet my new life as a single man. And then, 3 years ago, came the miracle of finding new love. 2 weeks ago was the wedding. Now that is an incredible love story, and one that I treasure beyond all words. Not all end or culminate in that manner, but it is a journey that I can only tell because it's my story. Love comes into our lives in many ways. And I've always said when dealing with grief that we are born in love. We experience grief. We need to use surrender and use gratitude to get us back to love. In whatever way that is comfortable to each and every one of you. And always we need to remember, and I think this is an extremely important thing in the grief journey, the only person with whom I am going to spend my entire life is me. And it's the same for you. With some people, we're blessed to have a short period of time, a season, as it were. For others, we get to spend a much longer time. But it's not the quantity that counts. It's the quality. And those are two important things for us to remember in the grief journey, and why talking of death is an important thing for us to do. Because when we understand the finitude of life, it makes life far more precious. Because we realize we only have a short time and we want to make it as wonderful and blessed as possible. So it enriches the finitude of life, enriches our lives. But equally, as we talk of death and realize that death is part of life, that begins to inform our spiritual being, our essence. And that too is extremely important. In whatever understanding may be yours, from a tradition, from a religion, from whatever pathway that you find meaning, you will grow your spiritual life. And I urge you to look at them all. And to also remember the great blessings that are ours in the world around us. And I'm going to conclude with a story that blessed my life. It would have been about 2008. Putra, our son, had died in 2005. And it's my custom when I'm in Bali, fortunately the house is very close to the on the Indian Ocean. And so it's my custom to get up in the morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I go to the ocean. It's still dark. The stars are still out, and you can see them, unlike here in Manhattan. The stars are out. I see the morning star, and then it gets very, very dark, and then slowly becomes the dawn. And as Indonesia is well known, we are the morning of the world, for days begin in that part of the world. And I always go there and I celebrate each new day. I spend time being grateful. I spend time listening to the nature, hearing the frogs, hearing all the sounds that I don't get to hear when I'm here in New York. And then on this particular morning, I had an experience that I've only had once. I had been particularly burdened and deeply saddened in grief. I was going through a very low period, a dark night of the soul. Missing Putra, asking lots of questions. And suddenly, as I was sitting there, I had done a couple of prayers that I like to begin in my tradition. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a ship. And the ship began moving, and all the lights were on. They'd obviously had a fabulous party the night before. And as is true, in the early morning hours, they leave the port in Bali and begin heading out to Nusa Tenggara, out to Lombok and Nusa Flores and Komodo and all the wonderful parts of the great country known as Indonesia. And so I watched this ship and I continued to pray. And I watched it and I watched it. And it went, and it passed right over there. It was so beautiful. And it truly lifted my spirits. And then it went on and on. Oh, it's beyond my sight now. It's gone. No, it's not gone. It's beyond my human sight. And I burst into tears. Putra in my heart was on that ship, simply saying, I'm fine. I'll be waiting. And I'm convinced 6 years later, he came to take Joe home. And one day I'll join them. That is the journey in grief. We grow through it, and we can be blessed by it. But we're only blessed by it when we face it. So please, as in your life or as you are working with other caregivers, always include grief. Death or dying, death and grief, if that is appropriate to the situation that you're dealing with. And strength will be yours. I want to thank you for joining me this morning. I've been very honored to share a great deal of my personal story with you. But that's the gift that each of us has. And we always need to be grateful for the fact, as you have blessed me, pieces of you and pieces of me put us all back together. Thank you for joining me, and let us remember always, onward in love and caregiving. Namaste. God bless, and I'll see you next week on Thursday with our guest from Ireland.